Okay. Are you ready? Okay. Was that a yes? Are we? Yes, we're fine there. Okay. Would you like to say hello? Okay.
Hello, Daddy.
And welcome to Pet Talk from me, Anna. And if you could just look up for a moment. Hello. And that's Teddy. There he is. Would you like to say welcome to Steph? Would you like to say welcome before you do anything else? Yeah, he's not sure. He just wants to do everything all at once, right?
Oh.
Okay. Would you say hello to Steph, please? That's lovely.
Hi, Teddy.
Very much. And now, hello. This is my lovely guest, Steph Cronin, who has written the best puppy book ever. And I really would have loved to have had this before Teddy came to live with us. It's called How to Raise a Puppy, a Dog-Centered Approach. And I think the clue is in dog-centered approach. So perhaps you might like to start there, Steph. What is a dog-centered approach?
Sure, Anna. Now I'd better correct you first, though, and say that that it was co-written by myself and also, of course, the amazing Turid Rugas. I don't want to be taking an undue amount of credit here.
Right. I should have mentioned Turad, but she's not here, so I think. And yet, I can feel her philosophy, her experience, and her knowledge is everywhere in this book. So yes, I do know that she's there.
I just wanted to make sure. But sorry, yes, to go back to your question, what do we mean by dog-centered? Well, I suppose what we wanted to do was put the puppy back in the picture and what the puppy needed and what the experience was like for the puppy, because I think up to now a lot of the puppy books have been really focused on what the human wants and needs out of that relationship. And that's usually obedience and it's usually control, and those things are not high up on a puppy's list of priorities when they're taken from their mum at 8 or 9 weeks old and put in a new environment. And I think we just wanted people to take a step back and see it from their perspective and try and approach it in a way that was going to be, I suppose, a little bit kinder and a little bit more compassionate towards this little creature of another species who you've just taken home, and looking at their needs and how we can meet them and what we can do to make that experience more pleasant for them.
I thought it's absolutely vital, because how can we even begin to understand what a puppy needs when we're from a different species? And the wonder, I had a lovely book to begin with that I devoured by Victoria Stilwell, which really helped me as I was preparing for Teddy's arrival. But what it didn't have the understanding within it. And I'm sure Victoria, is very, very aware of your research, but I think it was an older book. And I think the research that is presented in your book and Turid's is different because it's more recent. And I feel like it's an update on things that we perhaps knew before versus what we know now. And so I guess the next thing I really want to talk about is the difference between wolves and dogs, because I think this is the cause of huge misunderstandings. So perhaps it would be good to get a little bit of a sense of what those differences are.
Yeah, well, I guess what we know now is that dogs are not descended from the wolves that we have these days. That dogs and wolves had a common ancestor, which was the grey wolf. And wolves, we know, are pack animals who live in a family. And there's the breeding pair, and then there's usually 1 to 2 litters of puppies. Wolves hunt. They hunt for a lot of their food, or some, not all types of wolves, but a lot of wolves will hunt for their food. Dogs are social creatures. They're not necessarily pack animals in the way that wolves are, but they are social. So they tend to live together in, fairly loose social groups. And they tend to scavenge for their food. They don't tend to hunt. And the big difference, of course, is that dogs have been domesticated. And I think we're in a really good place now where we have a lot more research into how dogs behave when there are no humans around, rather than looking at how wolves behave. And obviously we can learn a lot more about dogs by watching dogs than we can by watching wolves. And there's been, I suppose maybe in the last 20 years or so, there's been more research into free-ranging dogs in India. I don't know if you've ever spoken to Sindhu or Pangal. She's done some really interesting work with the streeties over in India. And there's been more sort of academic research done into how dogs spend their time and how they raise their young. And I suppose that's where we were looking. I had the great honor and pleasure of doing Turid's education years ago, back in sort of 2016, 2017. And she was always, I suppose, drawing comparisons to what the mother dog does. Because it's really important. And she always said what good mothers they were and how much we could learn from how mother dogs raise their young. So I think looking at how they do things and how they set things up for the puppy, particularly in terms of the amount of care puppies receive when they're young, that's something I'm always telling people in my puppy class. I'm always saying, look, if your puppy was in the wild, they wouldn't be left alone before they were 4 or 5 months, not even for 10 minutes, because if they were, they'd be eaten. And this is a really hardwired thing in dogs, that they have that expectation that is, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years in their DNA, that tells them if you're on your own, you're going to get eaten. So for the puppy, having someone there all the time is really, really important. And we see that there's a lot of alloparenting that happens with dogs in the wild. So aunts and mothers and dads will all help raise them. It's not like the way we do it, and there's one mother raising a litter of puppies. They get help, they get support. And that's another thing Turid always said, that they get help. It's not the way we do it, isn't the natural way for dogs to do it. And the other dogs in the family will actually lactate for the puppies. They'll go and get food and regurgitate it for the puppies. So it really is, I suppose, a group mission to raise puppies. And having all of that support means that they don't have to be left alone. And that social aspect of being a puppy, I think, is something that we can forget about when we're raising puppies.
I was absolutely staggered by the difference between the time in which they naturally leave their mothers, if they leave their families at all, and the 8 weeks at which we take them. Because Teddy has separation anxiety. He is particularly attached to me. So his anxiety is not about being on his own, although I wouldn't attempt it. It's about being without me. He can be without me for short periods, as long as he's with his daddy, but that's about it. And we were, before we had the lockdowns, working on him staying with friends, and I think we got up to about 20 minutes, which was fine. But he needed to be entertained. He wasn't relaxed necessarily. So we'd begun to make progress, and we haven't really got back to that training, which I think we will do. But the point is, I always suspected that it was because he had left too soon. And actually, more recently, I've come to realize, thinking back, they wanted to rehome his mother when the litter had gone because they wanted to retire her from breeding. I think she'd had a few litters and they wanted to rehome her, and they had found someone. And my suspicion is that Teddy and his litter were parted from their mother immediately after they were weaned. And I think they weren't ready for that.
Mm.
I have no proof of this except for the fact that when we went to collect Teddy, only one of his siblings was left and she was already gone.
Okay.
So I have, because I think she went probably at the same time as the first puppies, and Teddy was one that was a few days after the other puppies. And I think he had the experience of watching every one of his litter mates leaving, including his mother, and only one of his litter mates left, who I afterwards heard from the breeder was extremely distressed because he was the only one left and didn't want to be left alone for a second.
Yes, I know. It's really tough for them.
Yes. And then, we were told, well, if he cries, leave him. And I thought that's never going to happen because we had a lovely playpen for him in the kitchen. But that wasn't enough. He wanted to be right next to me. He didn't want to be in his playpen. We had done that because there was building work going on around the house. And when we were cooking, we didn't want, an accident. And so there were lots of reasons why we did this. But he just did not want to be in there, even though he could see us. We were there. We never left him alone. He would literally start shaking if he had to be in there at a time when he wasn't sleeping, when he wanted to be out. So we had to negotiate that. So when I read this in your book, I thought, oh my instincts have always been that this was wrong.
Yeah.
Because later I've also met puppies who were collected at 10, 12 weeks. And I could see the difference in the maturity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually it was Amber Batson that drew my attention to that study that you're referring to. And I think she said on the one hand, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, it's all far too young. But I think she did say that that 12 weeks was a point where there was actually a difference, when it was better to get them at 12 weeks than 8 weeks. I don't know what study that was. But yeah, we do. And if we're getting them at 8 or 9 weeks, they're being weaned at 5 or 6 weeks, because they don't wean them the night before you come and get them. They're taking them away even earlier, so that the puppies are ready to go at 8 or 9 weeks. And a lot of breeders don't want to keep them later than that because people want the teeny tiny puppies, and they're afraid if they don't get them when they're 8 or 9 weeks that they won't bond with them, or that it won't be the same. But there are some breeders now who do keep them that bit later. And my friend Harriet in Australia, I think she got her puppy at 12 weeks. I think she found a breeder that was actually holding on to them that bit longer, which is great. But they want that physical contact, because if you look at how they are with their mums and their litter mates, they're on top of each other. They're not, separated by bars or pens or anything like that. They are on top of each other all of the time. They're either playing and fighting and biting. And their first little instinct when they're born is to crawl towards the warmth of mum to get the milk. That's their first instinct. And then, I mean, I feel for people, because quite recently I had a client, and she'd just got this gorgeous little Labradoodle puppy, and she wanted to do a consult, and I went in, and the first thing she said to me with an awful guilty look on her face was, look, I'm really sorry, I got the crate, but the kids said they'd never speak to me again if I made the puppy sleep in the crate. She was really distressed in there. And I said, that's brilliant. I'm so glad. Your children are very wise. But people get it from all angles. Oh, you simply must put your puppy in a crate. Like 50% of the people I meet in puppy class, by the time they come to puppy class, they've already crate trained their puppy. And they think if they're going to travel with their puppy, they need to be crate trained. They think if the puppy's going to be toilet trained, they need to be crate trained. And sure, my last dog was a greyhound, and she traveled all sorts of places with me. She was never in a crate, and we never needed to crate her. But people are told this, and I think a lot of people now genuinely believe that a crate is a key piece of equipment if you're getting a puppy. But what they want is to be on top of you.
Yeah, they do. And we had a crate for Teddy, but it was literally right next to me. It couldn't have been closer to me. It was right next to me. And looking back, I mean, now I wouldn't do it because I understand more. But even within that, he was right next to me. And I remember, see, there were little clues. Like I had a teddy bear on the bed, and I had to hide it because Teddy would get very distressed if he saw the teddy bear next to me.
Oh.
And I think it breaks my heart, but in his mind, he must have thought, that's a puppy, and how come a puppy can be with you and I can't?
Yeah, I know.
You know, so it was just one of those things. So he was made as comfortable as I could within what I had kind of been led to believe. And he wasn't. We never left him to cry or anything like that. He was always there, right next to me. And but I do feel that there is an initial trauma here that goes back to that time. And I just never want to see him stressed. That's the matter. So it's very fascinating to learn this. I love your book, has so much wonderful information. There's information on different breeds and the kinds of things that they might like to do based on the breed. There's, so that if you're wanting to choose a dog, that there's a breed there. What to do when you bring your puppy home. It's absolutely lovely. There's just so much in here. You talk about how to choose a breeder as well, and the ups and downs of adoption. Now, something else that you talk about is fear periods. Tell us about those, because I thought that was a very useful bit of information also.
Yeah, so dogs probably have 2 or 3 fear periods, and they tend to coincide with times when they're getting that little bit more independent. So they need to be, I suppose, a little bit more cautious. And the first fear period is usually at 8 weeks, which of course is the time when we remove them from everything they've ever known, which can be quite traumatic. And they can have another one at sort of the adolescent period at 4, 5, 6, 7 months. I think there could potentially be a third one, but I can't actually remember for certain. But they are basically periods of time when they're just that bit more sensitive, and they could be afraid of things that they were never afraid of before. One of the dog in the book that we follow, Scout, he had a fear period in his adolescence. I think he was 6 or 7 months, and he suddenly just developed a fear of trees on their own. Trees he'd passed many a time before that never bothered him, but just lone trees standing on their own frightened the life out of him for a few weeks, and then he was suddenly fine again. But of course, the mistake we sometimes do when they're scared of something is we make a big deal out of it, and we try and push them to engage with whatever it is that they're afraid of. But the advice that we give to people in the book is just let them choose. Turid always said the most important thing about overcoming fear is having choice. And if your dog is afraid of something, give them the choice. Let them think about whether they want to approach it. And if they want to go away, that's fine. You can give them the chance again to approach it in a week's time or a few days' time. And she said dogs are naturally curious. So if you give them enough opportunity and don't push them, they will usually overcome that fear themselves. But if we kind of coerce and bully them into having these scary experiences, they're much more likely to retain that fear. So our advice to people, if their puppy or their adolescent dog is going through a fear period, is try not to give them any frightening experiences. Try not to do anything that is going to make them nervous. And if they are nervous, don't push the issue, give them choice, have a little bit of compassion, help them out if they need help out of that situation. And oftentimes it'll just pass itself, given a bit of time and a bit of patience and a bit of understanding.
It's such a useful thing to know, because again, looking back, and Teddy is not happy around bigger, bouncier dogs. I know that's quite a common thing, I think. But looking back, it was just around that period. And I think you talk about another one around in the first year, somewhere in the first year. But it was before the first year, and it was around that adolescent stage that he had a very negative experience with a Labrador. And to this day, he's suspicious of Labradors. I have to be careful around Labradors. He's either going to love them or hate them, but there's no in between there. And this lab was very unpleasant to him. And then later on again, it was an Alsatian around 13 months. He got pounced on by an Alsatian. So there's German Shepherds. So there were these two experiences, and I always felt that changed him, and him much more likely to react. The issue around Rottweilers also, I think, dates back from about 8. Well, when we first got him, no, he would have been about 12 weeks old when two Rottie type dogs ran at him. And he was absolutely terrified. The dogs didn't do anything to him. I think they just were being curious and wanting to say hello, but he was absolutely terrified. So they have these experiences, don't they? And we then wonder why they behave the way they do. But if we're paying attention, we can see that there are moments that define them.
Yeah, and if one or two of those experiences had happened at another time, he might have been fine. He might have gotten over it much quicker. But Anna, I always say about Labradors that they're like that drunk guy in the pub who wants to hug everyone. That's what Labradors are often like, and they come up to other dogs all friendly and goofy, and they can be quite insistent about saying hello, and they don't always read the
Yes.
signs. So a lot of dogs who are reactive around other dogs don't like Labradors, and they don't like Spaniels, who also tend to sort of run around and be really sort of,
Yes,
fumbling around, being overly friendly.
I can see that. Well, this particular lab, it was not one of those. It was he had an absolute dislike of Teddy, and they were roughly the same age. So I think that this was a testosterone thing, because neither had been done, and saw each other around the neighborhood, and every time it was horrendous. With the way that this dog would become absolutely apoplectic with rage of like behavior towards Teddy, who would just go, "What's the deal? You calm down." But towards after a few of those experiences, he started to then react and say, "Well, I've got to defend myself here."
Yeah.
And I think if I had understood the situation more, I mean, what to do more, I would have made sure that the two never met. I would have worked on that. So that was sadly not one of the nice labs. Teddy can cope with nice ones, and Spaniels he considers to be his tribe, so that's fine.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he's not, as long as they're not bigger than him.
Yeah,
he's
happy. Okay.
If are bigger or more muscular, so the athletic type dogs, the pointers, etc., he's definitely not happy about them bouncing up to him. But he's got a real sense, but I do think it's those defining moments.
Yeah.
So
they're very sensitive.
I'm conscious of time, and I know that you are limited. So look, there was something I read that made me laugh out loud. And it was in a study that showed what dogs on their own met and the percentage of what they eat,
Yes.
was it 20? I think it was. I'm looking for it now, but I can't find it. An extraordinary amount of poo is naturally eaten in
Yes.
the wild world of dogs. What on earth is going on there?
But generally not their own poo. So it's usually not dog poo they eat. It's usually poo of other species.
Yeah. Well, the reason I got is because, heaven forbid, a human gets caught short and has to do it out in the wild. It's the bane of my life. At least once or twice a year, this happens. And oh my goodness, it is not pleasant.
But perfectly natural.
So what's going on here?
Food is food, I guess.
Oh, yes, he usually, without wishing to be too graphic, goes for the most disgusting poo, which would be, of course, the human who gets caught short whilst out in the wild. But there it is, it seems that it's a dog thing, that this is something that they do quite naturally.
Yes. Yeah.
Why, you're going to tell me?
Well, I'm not sure exactly why. One thing that just springs to mind, apart from the food, the food thing, is I wonder if that would have been quite a useful use of dogs if they were cleaning up after the humans. Would this have been something we would have selected for, maybe? I've no basis for that. I'm just, guessing. Maybe that was a useful skill, like barking and hunting and cleaning
Possibly.
up after the humans.
I guess it's possible. Oh my goodness me. Yes.
But
Because
probably, I'd imagine in terms of nutrition, probably what they can smell whatever else we've eaten in there, and humans
yes,
probably generally have quite good diets. So maybe, what's coming out is more nutritionally dense than maybe in other
yes.
animals' business.
At risk of everybody being sick during our conversation, I think we might leave it.
I'm blaming you for that one. I didn't bring up the poo.
No, absolutely. I take full responsibility for that one.
Yeah.
Just one other question, and that's about leads. In the book, you recommend longer leads. I presume you don't mean these
Retractable leads.
yeah, retractable leads, because I those drive me crazy. I think they're very dangerous. People use them close to roads as well. It's
I know.
But what is it about a longer lead that's better when we're training our dogs to walk alongside us?
Well, the first thing is we know they're much more relaxed on a longer lead. Our colleagues at France, the Budzinskis of Dog Field Study, have done some really interesting research into a dog's heart rate when they're being walked. And the longer the lead, the more relaxed the dog is. And their pace is just naturally different to ours. They want to stop and sniff. So if we can give them a bit more space to do those things, it's going to be much less frustrating for them. And there will naturally be much less pulling. Because if you think about it, a lot of people, especially if you've got a small dog and you've got 1.5 meters lead, most of the length of your lead is going from your hand to the dog's harness. Like that's probably nearly 1 meter already. So the dog's got no space to move around and do their sniffing and do what they're naturally inclined to do. Whereas if you have a longer lead, the dog's more relaxed, they can do their sniffing, and they're actually much less likely to pull. I always tell people, I've had not many, but I've had maybe 2-3 clients over the course of my career where I've been called in because the dog was pulling in a way that was totally unmanageable for the owners. And we did zero training. I just put them in a comfortable harness and a longer lead, and that's all that was required. The dog stopped pulling. There was no training. It was a really easy job for me. So if they're more comfortable, they're less likely to pull. So I mean, I suppose the minimum length you want is about 3 meters, but if you can do 5, some leads you can get are great. They clip onto each other, so you can half the length of them if you need to. So if you're on a really narrow footpath, and you need to temporarily make your lead shorter, you can clip it on without having that awful retractable carry on going on.
I think for looking back for Teddy, we did have the very long training lead when we were out. But on pavement walks, I just ended up running because he only had one speed.
Okay.
On the way home, he would slow down.
Yeah.
But he was just out to sniff as much as he could, as fast as he could, to begin with, and then he would run, and then he would slow down a bit, and as he got closer to home, then he couldn't wait to get home, and he'd be running home. So those were the days when I lost a considerable amount of weight.
Running after the puppy.
Running after, I used to call him my personal trainer. You mentioned harness, and I maintain that I don't understand why in puppy classes people are told not to have a harness, because it makes no sense to me. I was always afraid that Teddy was going to harm himself because of the way that he would, pull on the collar. So why is it that people are still being told no harness, use a collar?
I don't know. There's all sorts of misinformation about harnesses. People often think that they're going to make the dog pull, which they don't. And also there are lots of really, I would say probably 95% of the harnesses in the market are no better than collars because they're so badly designed. In my puppy classes, what I do now is I loan out harnesses, because if people go to the pet shops, they're going to come in with a harness that's most likely no better than a collar. So I lend them good harnesses. I lend them a Y-shaped H-back harness with lots of space that the dog can fully move all of their joints, just so the dog is wearing something comfortable when they're young, because people often don't want to invest when they know their dog is going to outgrow something. And once people, I would say 95% of the people who I lend harnesses to then want to buy that same brand of harness, because once they've experienced the difference of a well-fitting harness, they usually do want to stick with it. But I think it's just that old-fashioned mindset of controlling dogs and using pain to restrict their movement. It's easier to hurt a dog in a collar than it is to hurt a dog in a harness. And I suppose for some people that's a benefit of collars.
Yeah, which is no benefit at all.
No.
So I hope that our conversation has inspired lots of people, and no less than to get your wonderful book, which you wrote with Turid Rugas, who is just a wonderful, almost icon, I think, in the doggy world. So it's called How to Raise a Puppy, a Dog-Centered Approach. I'll be putting a link to it in the description box. And if people want to find you, Steph, how do they do that?
Well, I've got a website, which is just Steph's Dog Training, .ie, I think, www.stephsdogtraining.ie. And I'm on the usual social media, Facebook and Instagram, at Steph's Dog Training. I'm pretty sure are my handles for both of those things. And I'm always happy to help. If anyone has any questions, they want to email me, especially after they've read the book, they're always very welcome to do so. And what we would love as well, Anna, is if people could review the book if they buy it, and want to review it on Amazon. That really helps. It really helps get it up the rankings a bit so other people can see it and buy it too, hopefully. And actually, Turid herself is very good at responding to emails as well. I think our contact details are actually in the book there somewhere.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Anna. And thanks, Teddy. Bye.
Well, Teddy is now snoozing.
Snoozing. Quite right. Quite right.
Oh, thank you all. Until next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.